Here's what they don't tell you about discovering your boss is a sexual predator. The shock isn't the worst part. The worst part is realizing how many women suffered in silence because they thought no one would believe them. And the absolute worst part? Knowing you were the one person who could have stopped it sooner. I'm Miranda, and I spent 9 years working my way up from HR coordinator to director at a mid-sized tech consulting firm. I believed in doing things the right way, following procedures, documenting everything, protecting employees. I thought if you just followed the rules and did your job well, justice would prevail. Turns out, I was half right. The rules do work. You just have to know exactly how to weaponize them. Let me back up. My company had about 250 employees, and I was the HR director, which meant I handled everything from hiring to investigations to employee relations. It was a job I took seriously. Maybe too seriously, according to some of the executives who thought I was too idealistic about workplace ethics. But I'd spent 9 years building trust with employees, and I wasn't about to compromise that for politics. Thomas Vickers was our senior VP of operations. 48 years old, charismatic, politically connected, and making around $450,000 a year. He'd been with the company for 12 years and had what everyone called a great mentorship program for young employees in his department. He was the guy who took promising talent under his wing, gave them opportunities, helped them advance. At least, that's what I thought. Looking back now, there were red flags I should have caught. High turnover in his department. Women who left his team always seemed vaguely uncomfortable when I asked about their experience in exit interviews. Nothing concrete, nothing documented, just this pattern of young women coming through his department and then quietly moving on. But without formal complaints, what could I do? I convinced myself I was seeing patterns that weren't there. Until last spring, when Jessica walked into my office. It was late afternoon, maybe around 6. Most people had gone home. Jessica was 26, an analyst in Thomas's department. She'd been with the company for about 18 months, and she was good at her job, smart, ambitious, exactly the kind of person who should have been thriving under Thomas's mentorship. She stood in my doorway looking pale, hands shaking slightly. "Miranda, do you have a minute? I need to talk to you about something." I waved her in, closed the door. "Of course. What's going on?" She sat down, and for a long moment she just stared at her hands. Then she said, "It's about Thomas." My stomach dropped. You know that feeling when you suddenly realize something you've been deliberately not seeing? That was it. "Tell me everything," I said. And she did. Late night required meetings at hotels. Inappropriate touching disguised as friendly gestures. Comments about her appearance that crossed every professional line. Text messages and Slack messages asking about her personal life, her dating status, whether she was a team player. And the worst part, the subtle threats about her contract renewal, the implications that her career advancement depended on keeping him happy. She showed me the messages. Months and months of them, all on company systems. Company Slack, company email. A permanent digital record of a man systematically harassing an employee young enough to be his daughter. I felt sick. And then I felt something else, absolutely crystal clear fury. "How long has this been going on?" I asked, already pulling up my computer. "About 14 months, she whispered. I kept thinking it would stop. I kept thinking maybe I was overreacting. But Miranda, I can't do this anymore. I can't go to another hotel meeting. I can't handle another message asking if I'm free this weekend." I looked at her. "You're not overreacting. Not even a little. And I need you to know something. This ends now." She looked up surprised. "Really? Really? I'm going to document everything you just told me. I'm going to launch a formal investigation. And Jessica." I leaned forward. "I'm going to make sure he can never do this to anyone again." You know that moment when your brain shifts from shocked to strategic? That was it. Because here's what Jessica didn't know, what Thomas didn't know, what nobody at the company knew. I wasn't just an HR director. I was an HR director with 9 years of experience, complete access to every employee file, every communication system, every expense report, and a direct reporting line to the board's audit committee. And I'd just been handed a formal complaint that gave me legitimate investigation authority. Thomas thought he was untouchable because he had powerful allies on the board. What he didn't realize was that I had something better than allies. I had documentation privileges, and I knew exactly how to use them. The next 48 hours were methodical. I documented Jessica's complaint formally, following exact protocol. Then I did something I had the complete legal right to do as HR director investigating workplace misconduct. I started pulling files. Every woman who'd worked in Thomas's department over the past 8 years. 11 of them total. I reached out to the 5 who'd left the company, keeping it professional, asking if they'd be willing to chat about their experience in retrospect. 3 of them called me back within hours. You know how I knew I was onto something? The relief in their voices when I said Thomas's name. Oh my God, did someone finally report him? One woman asked. Finally, another said. I've been wondering when someone would. By the end of week 1, I had statements from 4 former employees, all describing the same pattern. Hotels, inappropriate messages, boundary violations, veiled threats about career advancement. He'd been doing this for 8 years. 8 years of targeting women in their mid-20s, using his position to create situations where they felt they couldn't say no. But here's where my HR director access became incredibly useful. Because while I was pulling employee files and communication logs, all completely legitimate as part of my investigation, I noticed something odd in Thomas's expense reports. I have financial audit access as part of my role. HR directors need to review department budgets and approve certain expenses. And Thomas's expenses had irregularities. Payments to consulting firms I'd never heard of. Vendor invoices that seemed inflated. Hotel charges that didn't match any known business trips. So I did what any thorough HR director would do during an investigation. I requested a detailed audit of his department's expenses over the past 5 years. Plot twist: Thomas wasn't just a sexual predator. He was also embezzling company funds. Over $380,000 across 5 years, funneled through fake vendor invoices to shell companies he controlled. The money trail was clear once you knew to look for it. And the really damning part? Some of that embezzled money paid for the very hotels where he'd been harassing employees. I sat in my office at midnight on day 10 of my investigation, surrounded by printouts and financial records, and I had a moment of absolute clarity. Thomas hadn't just violated company policy. He'd committed multiple felonies. Sexual harassment, embezzlement, fraud. And I had documentation of all of it. Some people might have gone straight to the CEO at that point. But I'd worked at this company for 9 years. I knew the power dynamics. Thomas had allies in senior leadership. If I went through normal channels, the investigation might get buried, evidence might disappear, victims might get pressured to recant. So I did what any smart professional would do. I called a lawyer. Not the company lawyer. My own employment attorney, someone I'd networked with over the years through HR director associations. I scheduled a meeting at her office, brought copies of everything, and laid it all out. She looked at the documents for maybe 20 minutes, then looked up at me. Miranda, this isn't just HR territory anymore. This is criminal. I know, I said. That's why I need to understand my reporting obligations before I take this to the board. She smiled slightly. Smart. Very smart. Because if you follow the right procedure here, you have whistleblower protection and he has no defense. We spent the next 2 hours mapping out exactly how to document and report everything. Formal complaint procedures, board notification requirements, mandatory reporting obligations under Sarbanes-Oxley for the financial fraud. Every step bulletproof, every action backed by policy and law. By the time I left her office, I had a roadmap. More importantly, I had professional protection. Everything I'd done was part of my legitimate job duties as HR director investigating a formal complaint. Every document I'd accessed was within my authority. Every piece of evidence was properly obtained. Thomas thought his board connections would protect him. What he didn't realize was that once I presented this evidence to the audit committee, his connections wouldn't matter. Because board members have fiduciary duties. And when you show them evidence of embezzlement and sexual harassment, they can't just ignore it. Legally, they have to act. I scheduled an emergency meeting with the audit committee chair for the following week. In the subject line, I wrote, "Mandatory reporting, financial irregularities and policy violations. 3 words that would destroy Thomas's career: mandatory reporting obligation. He couldn't block it. He couldn't spin it. And thanks to my documentation, he couldn't fight it. The audit committee meeting was scheduled for a Tuesday morning. Present, the audit committee chair, the company's general counsel, and an external auditor. I'd sent them my preliminary findings 48 hours in advance, enough time to review, but not enough time for Thomas to get wind of it and start his damage control. I walked into that boardroom with 3 binders and 9 years of professional credibility. The audit chair looked grim. "Miranda, walk us through what you found." I took a breath. This was it. 2 weeks ago, I received a formal complaint from an employee in Thomas Vickers' department regarding workplace harassment. Following standard investigation protocol, I began documenting the complaint and reviewing historical patterns. What I discovered was a systematic pattern of sexual harassment spanning 8 years and involving at least 5 employees, plus financial fraud exceeding $380,000. You could have heard a pin drop. I opened the first binder. Let's start with the harassment documentation. I walked them through each case. Jessica's complaint with the messages and timeline. The 4 former employees' statements, all describing identical patterns. Communication logs from company Slack and email showing inappropriate messages spanning years. Hotel charges that coincided with harassment complaints. The pattern was undeniable. The general counsel was taking notes, face getting paler by the minute. "This is extensive." "It gets worse," I said, opening the second binder. During my investigation, I noticed irregularities in department expense reports. Following my audit authority as HR director, I requested detailed financial review. I laid out the embezzlement evidence. Fake vendor invoices. Shell company accounts. Bank records showing money flowing to Thomas's personal accounts. $380,000 over 5 years, all documented with his signatures on fraudulent invoices. The external auditor actually whistled. "This is textbook embezzlement." The audit chair looked at me. "Miranda, I need to ask, how confident are you in this evidence?" "Completely confident," I said. "Every piece is documented. Every communication is timestamped. Every financial record is verified. This isn't speculation. This is systematic documentation of 8 years of harassment and 5 years of fraud." The general counsel closed his notes. "We need to suspend him immediately and launch a full external investigation." "Agreed," the audit chair said. "Miranda, you followed exact protocol here. This is exemplary investigative work. We'll need to notify law enforcement about the embezzlement." I nodded. "I understand." I also want to note that under mandatory reporting requirements, I had a legal obligation to bring this to your attention. This isn't a personal matter. This is corporate compliance. That was the key phrase. Corporate compliance. Because that meant I wasn't on a vendetta, I was doing my job. And that meant Thomas couldn't spin this as a rogue HR director with an agenda. The audit chair stood up. "We'll handle this from here. Thomas Vickers is suspended effective immediately pending investigation. His office will be locked down, all access revoked. We'll bring in external investigators within 48 hours. As I walked out of that boardroom, I felt something I hadn't felt in 2 weeks: relief. Not satisfaction yet. Not triumph. Just relief that I'd done everything right, followed every procedure, protected every victim. And the best part? Thomas had no idea any of this was happening. He'd go into the office that afternoon and find his badge didn't work. Thomas called me 63 times in the first 72 hours after his suspension. I didn't answer once. All communication went through the general counsel, exactly as protocol dictated. I heard through the grapevine that he showed up at the office twice trying to get in before security physically escorted him out. He tried calling board members, tried reaching out to his allies, tried spinning some story about a conspiracy against him. None of it mattered. Because the external investigators spent 3 weeks interviewing witnesses, reviewing documents, and confirming everything I'd found. And their report was even more damning than mine. They found a 6th victim and identified an additional $40,000 in embezzled funds. The board gave him a choice: resign immediately with no severance, or be terminated for cause and face immediate criminal referral. He resigned. Probably thought he could spin it as a graceful exit, find a new position somewhere else. But here's the thing about criminal investigations: they don't stop just because you quit your job. The FBI opened a white-collar crime investigation into the embezzlement within a week. The district attorneys started reviewing the harassment cases for potential criminal charges. And because everything was documented, because I'd followed exact procedure, because every piece of evidence was properly obtained, there was no defense. For months after Jessica walked into my office, Thomas Vickers was arrested on federal embezzlement charges and state sexual misconduct charges. He took a plea deal. For years in federal prison for the embezzlement, concurrent state sentence for the harassment-related charges. Full restitution of the $380,000 plus fines. Sex offender registration. Professional licenses revoked permanently. From senior vice president making $450,000 to federal inmate making 12 cents per hour in the prison kitchen. And Jessica? She got promoted to senior analyst. The company settled with all 5 victims privately, providing career counseling, job security guarantees, and financial compensation that they all said finally gave them closure. As for me, the board promoted me to vice president of HR with a $40,000 salary increase. They asked me to overhaul the company's harassment prevention program. My new policies have been adopted by 12 other firms in our industry. I was recently featured in HR Magazine as the whistleblower who changed corporate culture. I've been invited to speak at 3 industry conferences about professional responsibility and documentation best practices. But you want to know the real consequences? The ones that went beyond the criminal sentence? Thomas's wife divorced him 8 months after his arrest. She took the kids, got full custody, and the court ordered him to pay $2,800 monthly in child support that's accumulating as arrears while he's in prison. His elderly parents are paying for his commissary, but the relationship is strained at best. He lost everything in the divorce settlement. The house they'd lived in, worth around $1.2 million, got sold to pay partial restitution. His 401k got raided for another $300,000. He's got a 10-year payment plan for the rest of the restitution after he gets out. Last I heard, he's got 2 years left on his sentence. His kids stopped visiting after 6 months. His professional reputation is destroyed permanently. Felony embezzlement and sexual misconduct means no consulting firm, no tech company, no professional role will ever hire him. He's looking at manual labor for the rest of his life, if he can even get that with a criminal record. Meanwhile, I just accepted a chief people officer position at a larger tech firm. $220,000 base salary. I'm engaged to someone I met through professional networking. I sleep soundly every night knowing I protected women who couldn't protect themselves. People sometimes ask me if I feel guilty about what happened to Thomas. If I think the punishment was too severe. If I regret how far it went. And here's my honest answer: I didn't ruin Thomas Vickers' life. He did that himself. 8 years of preying on young women. 5 years of stealing company money. He made those choices every single day. I just documented them. I just followed the rules. I just refused to help him hide it anymore. Do I regret it? Not even a little. Because here's what I learned through all of this: the system works if you know how to use it. Professional expertise isn't just about doing your job, it's about understanding how to weaponize your legitimate authority when it matters most. And sometimes, justice isn't about revenge. It's about documentation. Would I do it again? Absolutely. In fact, I help other HR professionals navigate similar situations now. I teach them how to document properly, how to follow exact protocol, how to use their professional access to protect employees from predators who think they're untouchable. Thomas thought he was protected by his position, his connections, his power. What he didn't realize was that I had something better than power. I had process. I had documentation. And I had 9 years of professional credibility that he couldn't destroy no matter how hard he tried. The last time anyone saw him, he was being led into federal court in an orange jumpsuit to accept his plea deal. Jessica was in the courtroom that day along with the other victims. They all gave impact statements. They all got to tell the judge exactly what he'd done to them. And I got to sit there knowing that every word they spoke was possible because I'd followed exact procedure, documented everything, and used my professional access exactly as it was intended to protect employees from abuse. Some people might call what I did revenge. I call it accountability. And honestly, watching that system work exactly as it should, seeing those women finally believed, finally protected, finally given justice, that was worth every hour of documentation, every late night reviewing files, every strategic decision. Thomas Vickers learned the hardest lesson of his life. You can have all the power and connections in the world, but you can't beat someone who follows the rules better than you break them. Me? I learned that sometimes the most powerful weapon isn't revenge. It's professional competence. It's knowing exactly what you have access to, exactly what you're allowed to do, and exactly how to document it so thoroughly that no one can question your motives or your methods. And that's a lesson I carry with me every single day, both in my work protecting employees and in my life knowing that I used my expertise for exactly what it was meant for. Justice, documentation, and making sure that predators don't get to hide behind their positions anymore. Would I recommend it? If you're an HR professional who discovers something like this, absolutely follow the protocol I followed. If you're someone facing workplace misconduct, report it formally. Document everything. Find someone in authority who will listen. Because here's the truth, the system can work. You just have to know how to use it. And sometimes, the most satisfying revenge isn't personal at all. It's professional. And it's permanent.